Hi, folks. I'm going to talk this time about starting a story with the end rather than starting with the start. And I don't mean writing it that way or depicting it that way. I mean in your head, deciding what the end is going to be and then work your way back to the start. Now, this puts me in mind of fiction authors who say that sometimes their characters, in effect, act independently within their story and so change the story. If you're trying to achieve a particular end and the characters are wanting to go somewhere else and the general advice is go with what the characters want to do, then it makes it very difficult to arrive where you originally conceived. In other words, it might not be a good idea to start with at least a detailed ending, maybe a simple ending that you can sort of arrive at even if the characters go different ways would make sense. Game of Thrones, both the show and the books, A Song of Fire and Ice, may illustrate this because George R.R. Martin is what he calls a gardener. He sits down, he starts writing. He doesn't know where he's going. So he's starting from the start, not with the end. And he's now in a position where he can't seem to end his story. And it's been many, many years since the last book was out. He's got 2 books left to write. He says he's written 1 more or less, but he's 70-some years old, so who knows if he'll ever end it. We also saw this in Game of Thrones, the TV show, where the showrunners, and some of the actors I suspect, got tired of making this epic year after year, and so they decided to end it quickly. And also at that point, they no longer had any guidance from George R.R. Martin because he hadn't finished his books. And so they put together something that was rushed and made many people unhappy. Now they had started sort of from a start and knew the end up to a point, which was the point that George R.R. Martin had gotten to. And after that, they were messed up and it ended up being messed up. Now in game design, you can have the same kinds of situations arise. You don't have characters, no, but you may have other things that sort of make their own way in the game in ways that you didn't anticipate or even necessarily wanted, but that's the way the game goes. It takes on a life of its own. And I generally say to people, let the game go where the game wants to go, and you're more likely to end up with a good game than if you try to force it to where you wanted it to go. Now, I'm going to quote from Warren Spector, who is a very famous designer of video games, and Deus Ex is the one that's most well known, but he's designed many others. He once said, quote, "One of the things about making games, at least for me, is you start out with a vision of what something can be, and you close your eyes and you imagine this thing. A couple of years later, you open your eyes, and the thing you created could be wonderful, but it's not like the thing you imagined originally. Deus Ex is the one and only time I ever opened my eyes after 3 years and said, 'Holy cow, this is what I imagined.'" Now, I think that's a useful story for anybody who designs games, that perhaps sometimes your game will end up the way you imagined it, but more often it will end up some way, and you hope a wonderful way, but not the way you imagined, and yet it will still be viable and still be reasonable and still be true, if you can say that. Thanks for listening.